The California sun was absolutely brutal that summer. Keanu Reeves had been away for 6 long months, filming back-to-back projects in Europe and Asia. The kind of schedule that leaves you exhausted down to your bones. All he could think about during those final flights home was collapsing in his own bed, maybe taking a quiet swim in his pool, and just existing without cameras and crew members around him for a while. His house in the Hollywood Hills had always been his sanctuary. It wasn't the biggest celebrity mansion by any means, but it was private, tucked away behind tall hedges and old trees that kept the world at a respectful distance. The pool was his favorite feature, a simple rectangular design with blue tile, surrounded by comfortable lounge chairs and a view of the city below that never got old. When his car pulled up to the gate that afternoon, something felt off. Not wrong exactly, just different. The gate was closed like it should be, but there was something about the way the late afternoon light hit the windows that made him pause. He punched in his code and drove up the curved driveway, parking in his usual spot. That's when he saw them. Wet footprints on the stone pathway leading from his backyard to the side gate. Not small prints either. These were from several people, all leading away from his property. His mind immediately went to the worst possibilities. A break-in? Vandalism? He'd heard stories from other actors about fans getting too obsessed, crossing lines that shouldn't be crossed. He walked quickly around to the back of the house, his heart picking up speed. But when he got to the pool area, nothing looked damaged or stolen. In fact, everything looked almost normal. Almost. There were a few empty soda cans sitting on the edge of the pool deck, the kind teenagers drink. A beach ball was floating in the water that definitely wasn't his. One of the lounge chairs was in a different position than he remembered. Keanu stood there for a moment just looking at the scene. It was strange, but it wasn't threatening. Whoever had been here hadn't broken anything or taken anything obvious. They'd just used his pool. Without permission, sure. But there was something almost innocent about the evidence they'd left behind. He went inside and checked the house. Everything was secure, nothing missing from what he could tell. His security system showed no forced entry. That meant whoever was getting in knew the property well enough to find a way that avoided the sensors, or they were coming over the fence in spots the cameras didn't quite reach. Keanu wasn't sure what to do. Part of him was annoyed. This was his private space, his escape from the world. But another part of him was curious. Who would be brave enough or foolish enough to sneak into a celebrity's pool? And more importantly, how long had this been going on? Over the next few days, he started paying attention. He'd leave the house for a few hours, running errands or meeting with his agent, and when he came back, there would be new signs. More wet footprints. A forgotten towel hanging on the fence. Once, he found a pair of goggles left behind on the diving board. He pulled up his security camera footage and started watching. The cameras didn't cover the entire pool area. He'd specifically designed it that way to give himself privacy. But they caught enough. He saw them coming over the fence in the early afternoon, usually around 2 or 3 o'clock. Groups of kids, mostly teenagers from the looks of it. They'd jump the fence at the same spot each time, where an old oak tree gave them easy access. What surprised him was how respectful they were being, in their own way. They weren't throwing wild parties or destroying things. They'd swim for an hour or two, laugh and talk, and then they'd leave. Sometimes they'd even try to clean up after themselves, though they weren't always successful at remembering everything. Keanu found himself watching these videos with a strange mix of emotions. Yes, they were trespassing. Yes, they should have asked. But watching them just enjoy the water on those scorching hot days, seeing them just be kids having fun, it was hard to feel truly angry about it. He remembered being young himself. Growing up, his family didn't have much. There were summers where the only way to cool off was a garden hose or a rare trip to a public pool that was always too crowded and too loud. He remembered looking at houses with pools and wondering what it must be like to just dive in whenever you wanted. But this couldn't continue. Not because he was worried about liability, though his lawyer would probably have a heart attack if he knew what was happening. It was more about respect and boundaries. These kids needed to understand that you can't just take what isn't yours, even if it seems like it's not being used. He decided to do some investigating. Instead of calling the police or hiring extra security, he wanted to understand who these kids were and why they thought this was okay. One evening, he took a walk around his neighborhood, something he didn't do often enough. He recognized some of the houses, had waved to the families over the years, but he'd never really gotten to know any of them. His work kept him away so much, and when he was home, he usually valued his privacy too much to socialize. But now he was looking at these houses differently, wondering which one belonged to the kids who'd been using his pool. He didn't have to wonder long. 2 houses down, he saw something that caught his eye. A group of teenagers was hanging out in a driveway, and one of them was wearing swim trunks that looked damp. Same style he'd seen in his security footage. The kid also had a guilty look on his face the moment he spotted Keanu walking by. Keanu didn't say anything that evening. He just nodded politely and kept walking. But he'd figured out his starting point. Tomorrow he'd pay a visit to that house and have a conversation with whoever lived there. He wasn't sure what he'd say yet, but he knew one thing for certain. This situation was about to change, one way or another. As he walked back to his house that evening, the sun setting behind the hills and painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Keanu thought about what he wanted the outcome to be. He could make this about punishment and consequences, or he could make it about something else entirely, something better. He just had to figure out exactly what that something was. The next morning, Keanu woke up with his mind already made up. He wasn't going to let this situation drag on or turn it into some dramatic confrontation. He'd just walk down the street, knock on the door, and have a simple conversation with whoever answered. Adult to adult, or adult to teenager, depending on who was home. He made himself coffee, went through his usual morning routine, and around 10 o'clock, he started walking down the street. It was a beautiful morning, the kind where the California sun hadn't turned brutal yet, and there was still a gentle breeze coming through the hills. A few neighbors were out watering their lawns or loading kids into cars. They'd stare for a moment when they recognized him, but most were used to seeing him around by now and would just wave politely. The house he was looking for was a nice 2-story place with a well-maintained yard and a basketball hoop in the driveway. There was a truck parked outside with construction company logos on the side. Someone was definitely home. Keanu walked up the driveway and knocked on the front door. For a moment, nothing happened. Then he heard movement inside, footsteps approaching. The door opened and a man in his early 40s stood there, wearing a work shirt and holding a cup of coffee. The moment he registered who was standing on his porch, the man's face went through about 5 different expressions in 2 seconds. Surprise, confusion, concern, and then something that looked a lot like dread. "Mr. Reeves," the man said, and Keanu could hear his voice trying to stay steady. "This is unexpected. What can I do for you?" Keanu gave him a friendly smile, trying to ease the obvious tension. "Hey, sorry to drop by unannounced. I'm Keanu and I live just up the street. You probably know which house. The one with the pool." The man's face went a shade paler. "The pool," he repeated, and there was no question in his voice. He knew exactly why Keanu was there. "Listen, I can explain. Or actually, I can't explain because I just found out about it myself a few days ago, but I want you to know." "Can I come in?" Keanu interrupted gently. "I'd rather talk about this inside if that's okay with you." The man nodded quickly and stepped aside. Of course. I'm David, by the way. Please come in." He led Keanu through a living room that was clearly home to teenagers. Gaming controllers on the coffee table, shoes scattered by the door, a backpack thrown over the couch. "Can I get you some coffee? Water?" "I'm fine, thanks." Keanu sat down on the couch, keeping his posture relaxed and open. He didn't want this to feel like an interrogation. David sat across from him, perched on the edge of his chair like he was ready to jump up at any moment. "Look," David started, "I know my son has been going to your pool. Him and his friends. I found out 3 days ago when I came home early from work and saw wet towels in his room. When I pressed him about it, he finally admitted everything." "How long has it been going on?" Keanu asked. David rubbed his face with his hands. "According to him, about 2 months. Started in early June when the heat wave hit. He swears they didn't break anything or steal anything. Not that that makes it okay," he added quickly. "Trespassing is trespassing, and I've already grounded him for the rest of the summer." "Is he here now?" "Your son?" David looked surprised by the question. "He's upstairs in his room. Why?" "I'd like to talk to him if that's all right with you. I'm not here to yell at anyone or threaten legal action. I just want to understand what was going through his head." David studied Keanu's face for a moment. probably trying to figure out if this was some kind of trap. Then he stood up and called toward the stairs. "Hey, get down here now." Heavy footsteps came down the stairs and a teenage boy appeared, maybe 16 or 17 years old. He was tall and skinny, with the kind of tan that comes from spending all summer outside. The moment he saw Keanu sitting on his couch, the kid froze completely. All the color drained from his face, and for a second Keanu thought he might actually turn around and run back upstairs. "Sit down," David said, his voice firm but not angry. The kid moved slowly to a chair, never taking his eyes off Keanu. He looked absolutely terrified. Keanu leaned forward a bit, keeping his voice calm and conversational. "What's your name?" "Brett," the kid managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. "Brett, I'm not here to get you in trouble." "Well, more trouble than you're already in," Keanu added with a slight smile, glancing at David. "I just want to ask you something. Why didn't you just knock on my door and ask to use the pool?" Brett looked at his father, then back at Keanu. "Because you're Keanu Reeves," he said, like that explained everything. And you're famous. You're in movies. People like you don't just let random neighborhood kids use their pools. I figured you'd say no, or you'd have security throw us out or something." Keanu nodded slowly. "So instead of risking me saying no, you decided to just take what you wanted without asking." Brett's face flushed red. "When you put it like that, it sounds really bad." "It was really bad," David interjected. "What you did was wrong, and you know it." "I know," Brett said quietly. "I'm really sorry. We just saw that you were never there, and it was so hot this summer. And the public pool was closed for repairs, and I thought maybe if you didn't know, it wouldn't matter." Keanu was quiet for a moment, just looking at this kid who'd made a stupid choice but clearly understood why it was stupid. He remembered being 17 and thinking he had the world figured out, making decisions that seemed logical at the time but looked ridiculous in hindsight. "Here's what bothers me," Keanu finally said. "Not that you wanted to swim. Not even that the pool was just sitting there unused. What bothers me is that you assumed I'd say no without ever giving me a chance to say yes." Brett looked confused. "Would you have said yes?" "I don't know, maybe not. But that's not the point. The point is that you made that decision for me. You decided that you knew what kind of person I was, and you acted based on that assumption instead of actually finding out." David was watching this exchange with interest now, his initial panic giving way to curiosity about where Keanu was going with this. "You know what else bothers me?" Keanu continued. "You told your friends. How many people knew about this?" Brett shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe 10 or 12 kids from school. We kept it pretty quiet, though. Didn't want too many people finding out. But you told 10 or 12 people to trespass on private property. You brought them into something illegal and put them at risk, too. That's not just affecting you. That's affecting other families, other kids who might not have understood how serious this was." "I didn't think about it like that," Brett admitted, and he looked genuinely troubled by this perspective. Keanu sat back and crossed his arms, but his expression wasn't harsh. "Look, Brett, I get it. I really do. I grew up without a lot of money. There were plenty of summers where I looked at people with pools and felt jealous. I understand wanting something you don't have access to. But here's the thing about being an adult that you're going to learn. You don't get to just take things because you want them and they seem available." The room was quiet for a moment. David looked like he wanted to say something but was letting Keanu finish. "So here's what's going to happen," Keanu said. "Brett, I want you to make me a list of every single kid who used my pool. Every name. And then I want you to come with me, and we're going to walk to every single one of their houses, and you're going to apologize to their parents for encouraging their kids to trespass." Brett's eyes went wide. "All of them?" "All of them. Today. Because those parents deserve to know what their kids were doing, and you need to take responsibility for your role in organizing this whole thing." David nodded approvingly. "That's more than fair." "But," Keanu added, and both David and Brett looked at him with surprise, "after we do that, after you've owned up to what you did, I want to have another conversation about what happens next. Because I'm not interested in just punishing you. I'm interested in seeing if we can turn this into something better." Brett looked confused but hopeful. "Better how?" Keanu stood up. "Let's take care of the apologies first. Then we'll talk about the rest. Get your list ready. We're going to have a busy afternoon." Brett spent the next 20 minutes in his room making the list while Keanu sat in the living room talking with David. They discussed normal things at first. How long David had lived in the neighborhood, what kind of work he did, how the construction business was going. It was strange how quickly the conversation shifted from tense confrontation to something that almost felt like two neighbors just getting to know each other. When Brett came back downstairs, he handed Keanu a piece of notebook paper with 11 names and addresses written in careful handwriting. His hand was shaking slightly as he gave it over. 11 kids, Keanu said, looking at the list. That's a lot of apologizing we need to do. Do I have to come? Brett asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Absolutely. This was your idea, so you get to own it. All of it. Keanu stood up and looked at David. You're welcome to come with us if you want. David shook his head. I think this is something Brett needs to do. But Brett, you call me if you need anything, understand? Yes, sir. Brett said quietly. They walked out into the afternoon sun and Keanu noticed Brett's posture, shoulders slumped, head down, feet dragging. The kid looked like he was walking to his own execution. They went to the first house on the list, which was just across the street, a boy named Christopher who was in Brett's grade. Brett knocked on the door, and when Christopher's mother answered, Keanu could see the exact moment she recognized him. Her eyes went wide, and she looked back and forth between the famous actor on her doorstep and her son's friend, who looked absolutely miserable. Hi, Brett started, his voice cracking a little. Mrs. Patterson, I need to tell you something. Christopher and I have been sneaking into Mr. Reeves's pool without permission for the past 2 months. I organized it and I convinced Christopher to come with us. I wanted you to know, and I wanted to say I'm really sorry for getting your son involved in something that was wrong. Mrs. Patterson's expression shifted through shock, anger, and then something like disappointment. Christopher! She called into the house. When her son appeared, she fixed him with a look that made even Keanu wince slightly. Is this true? Christopher, seeing both Brett and Keanu Reeves standing at his door, could only nod. We'll be having a serious conversation about this, Mrs. Patterson said firmly. Then she looked at Keanu. Mr. Reeves, I am so sorry. I had no idea Christopher was doing this. I know you didn't, Keanu said kindly. That's why we're here. I wanted to make sure all the parents knew what was happening. But I also want you to know that Christopher isn't in any legal trouble. This is about learning and making things right. They went to the next house and the next and the next. Each conversation followed a similar pattern. Brett would explain what happened and apologize. Parents would be shocked and angry. Kids would look mortified, and Keanu would gently reassure everyone that he wasn't pressing charges or looking for revenge. By the 6th house, something interesting started happening. Brett's apologies became more confident, more genuine. He wasn't just reciting words anymore. He was actually engaging with what he'd done and why it was wrong. Keanu noticed the change and felt something like pride in this kid he barely knew. At the 9th house, they encountered a mother who was a single parent, working 2 jobs. When Brett explained what had happened, she looked more exhausted than angry. I work so much, she said quietly. I didn't even know Tommy was going anywhere. He told me he was at Brett's house. Tommy, standing behind his mother, looked ashamed. I'm sorry, Mom. It was just so hot and I knew you couldn't afford to take me anywhere to swim. The mother's eyes filled with tears, and Keanu felt something twist in his chest. This was the reality behind the situation. Kids who just wanted to cool off. Parents who were doing their best but couldn't give their children everything they wanted. After they finished all 11 houses, Keanu and Brett walked back toward Keanu's house. The sun was lower in the sky now, and the temperature had finally started to drop to something bearable. Brett looked exhausted, emotionally wrung out from 2 hours of apologies and facing angry parents. That was harder than I thought it would be, Brett said finally. Taking responsibility usually is, Keanu replied. But you did good. By the end there, you really meant what you were saying. They reached Keanu's gate and Brett stopped, looking confused. Why are we here? Because I told you we'd have another conversation after the apologies. Come on. Keanu punched in his gate code and led Brett up to his house. Brett followed nervously, probably wondering if this was the part where the real punishment began. Keanu led him through the house and out to the pool area. In the late afternoon light, the water looked absolutely perfect, clear blue and inviting, reflecting the golden sun. Brett stood there looking at it, and Keanu could see the longing in his face mixed with guilt. "Sit down," Keanu said, gesturing to one of the lounge chairs. He sat down in another one facing Brett. "I want to tell you something about my childhood." Brett sat, looking confused but interested. "I grew up in Toronto and we moved around a lot. My mom was a costume designer and money was always tight. There were summers where it was so hot, and I'd see other kids in neighborhoods with pools and I'd feel exactly what you probably felt. Like it wasn't fair that some people had this amazing thing and I didn't." Brett nodded slowly, relating to the story. "But here's what I learned as I got older," Keanu continued. "The answer to that feeling isn't to take what isn't yours. It's to either work toward getting it yourself someday, or to find people who are willing to share. There are a lot of good people in the world, Brett. People who would share if you just asked them. But you're famous," Brett said. "Normal people don't just walk up to famous people and ask for favors." Keanu laughed at that. "You know what? You're right. That would be weird. But here's the thing, I'm not famous to this neighborhood. To the people on this street, I'm just the guy who lives in the house with the pool who's never home. That's it. And you know what I am when I'm home? Lonely." Brett looked surprised at this admission. "I'm away working most of the year," Keanu explained. "And when I come back here, I hide in my house because I think I want privacy and peace and quiet. But the truth is, it gets pretty isolating. I've lived on this street for 8 years. And until today, I'd never had a real conversation with your dad. I don't know any of my neighbors beyond polite waves." "So what does that have to do with the pool?" Brett asked. "Everything," Keanu said. "You saw a resource going to waste. An empty pool on the hottest summer in years. And instead of that being an opportunity for community, it became an opportunity for trespassing. That's on both of us in a way. You for not asking, and me for not being more present in this neighborhood." Keanu leaned forward, his expression serious but kind. "So here's what I'm thinking. What if we turned this into something legitimate? What if I let you and your friends use this pool, but we do it the right way?" Brett's eyes went wide. "Are you serious?" "Completely serious. But there would be rules. Real rules, not the fake rules you guys were following when you thought I didn't know you were here." "Like what kind of rules?" "First, you'd have to organize it properly. Pick specific days and times, maybe twice a week. You can bring 4 or 5 friends, but no more than that. The group has to be supervised. Either your dad or another parent has to be here. You clean up everything before you leave. And this is important, you treat this place with respect. This is still my home." Brett was staring at him like he'd grown a second head. "You'd really let us do that? After everything?" "I would. But here's the other part of the deal. You have to manage it. You have to coordinate with the other kids. Make sure everyone follows the rules, handle the schedule. If anyone messes up, the whole thing ends. Can you handle that responsibility?" Brett thought about it for a moment, and Keanu could see him processing everything. The weight of the responsibility, the trust being offered, the chance to turn his biggest mistake into something positive. "Yes," Brett said finally. "I can handle it. I will handle it." "Good, because I'm trusting you, Brett. A lot of people wouldn't give you this chance after what you did, but I believe that people deserve second chances when they show they understand their mistakes. You showed that today by facing every single parent and owning what you did. That took courage." Brett's eyes were getting watery and he blinked hard. "Thank you. Seriously, thank you. This is way more than I deserve." "Maybe," Keanu said with a smile. "But let's see if you can live up to it. There's one more condition, though." "What's that?" "At some point you need to teach me about this neighborhood. Introduce me to people. Help me be less of a hermit, deal?" Brett laughed, the tension finally breaking. "Deal. That's the easiest condition ever." They shook hands and Keanu stood up. "Go home and talk to your dad about this. Get his buy-in because he'll need to help supervise. Then we'll set up a proper schedule. And Brett, thank you for being honest today. That matters more than you know." As Brett walked back down the driveway, his posture was completely different from when they'd started. His head was up, his shoulders back, and there was something like hope in his step. Keanu watched him go and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Connection, community, purpose beyond the next movie role. Maybe this summer wouldn't just be about rest and privacy after all. Maybe it would be about something better. Word traveled fast in the neighborhood. By the next morning, everyone seemed to know what had happened. Not just the 11 families who'd been directly involved, but somehow the story had spread to every house on the street. Keanu's doorbell rang 3 times before noon. neighbors he'd never spoken to, coming by to either apologize on behalf of the community or to express their amazement at how he'd handled the situation. One woman, who lived 4 houses down, showed up with homemade cookies and tears in her eyes. "My daughter wasn't involved," she explained, "but I just wanted to thank you for being so kind to those kids. A lot of people in your position would have called the police or sued or something terrible. You gave them grace instead." Keanu accepted the cookies and felt somewhat embarrassed by the attention. He hadn't done anything special in his mind. He'd just treated some kids like human beings who'd made a mistake. But apparently that wasn't as common as it should be. David came over that afternoon with Brett to discuss the logistics of the pool arrangement. They sat at Keanu's kitchen table with coffee and worked out a schedule. Tuesday and Thursday afternoons from 2 to 5, supervised by a parent. Maximum of 6 kids at a time. Everyone had to sign a simple liability waiver that David helped draft. Cleanup was mandatory, and there would be a group chat for coordination. "This is really generous of you," David said as they finalized the details. "You know that, right?" "You didn't have to do any of this," Keanu shrugged. "I have a pool I barely use. Kids need a place to swim. Seems like an obvious solution once you get past the principle of the thing." Brett was quiet during most of the meeting, but Keanu noticed him watching everything carefully, taking mental notes. This kid was taking his new responsibility seriously, which was exactly what Keanu had hoped for. The first official pool day was that Thursday. Keanu had planned to be away, giving the kids space to just be kids without the weirdness of the homeowner watching them. But as Thursday approached, he found himself curious about how it would go. So instead of leaving, he stayed in his house, occasionally glancing out the window to see how things were going. David was there, sitting in a chair with a book, clearly taking his supervisory role seriously. Brett and 5 other kids were in the pool, and the difference from the security footage Keanu had watched was remarkable. They were louder, more relaxed, more joyful. There was no nervous looking over shoulders, no guilt hanging in the air. They were just kids having fun in a pool on a hot summer day, exactly as it should be. One of the kids was Tommy, the boy whose mother worked 2 jobs. Keanu watched him doing cannonballs off the diving board, laughing so hard he could barely catch his breath, and felt that same twist in his chest he'd felt at Tommy's house. When had he become someone who had so much and shared so little? Around 4 o'clock, Keanu made a decision. He grabbed some popsicles from his freezer. He'd bought them years ago for a party that never happened, and they'd just been sitting there, and walked out to the pool area. "Hey guys," he said, and 6 teenage heads swiveled toward him with expressions of surprise and something like awe. "Thought you might want these before you go. It's pretty hot out here." The kids accepted the popsicles with shy thank yous, and Keanu sat down near David. "How's it going?" "Smooth as can be," David replied. "They've been great. Respectful, careful with your stuff. Fret's been keeping everyone in line like he's running a military operation." Keanu smiled at that. He watched the kids for a while, not saying much, just being present. Eventually, they relaxed around him and went back to their games and conversations, occasionally including him in a question or comment. "Mr. Reeves," one girl asked, "is it true you did your own stunts in those movies?" And just like that, he was telling stories about film sets and stunt coordinators, and the kids were hanging on every word, not in a weird celebrity worship way, but in the way kids listen to any adult who's lived an interesting life and is willing to talk about it. What Keanu didn't know was that one of the parents who'd come to pick up their kid had started recording on their phone. Just a short clip, nothing dramatic, just Keanu sitting by his pool, talking with a group of neighborhood kids, everyone laughing at some story he was telling. The parent posted it to their social media with a simple caption: "Our neighbor caught local kids trespassing in his pool. Instead of calling the police, he did this." The post was shared by someone with more followers, then someone else. By that evening, it had been screenshot and posted to different platforms. By the next morning, it was everywhere. Keanu was completely unaware. He didn't spend much time on social media, and he was busy with meetings about his next project. But everyone else saw it. The video, the story, the comments from people who were touched by what seemed like a simple act of kindness. News outlets started picking it up. Entertainment websites ran stories with headlines like "Keanu Reeves proves he's the internet's favorite human again, and this is how Keanu Reeves handled pool trespassers." The Neighborhood Facebook group was flooded with messages from people around the world asking if the story was true. David called Keanu on Friday morning. "Have you seen what's happening online?" "What are you talking about?" "The pool thing. It went viral. There's a video and it's everywhere. News sites are calling it the most Keanu Reeves thing ever." Keanu felt a sinking feeling in his stomach. This was exactly what he'd been trying to avoid, turning a simple neighborhood situation into a media circus. "Who posted a video?" "I'm not sure, but it's not bad. Actually, it's the opposite of bad. People are really moved by what you did, but I figured you should know before reporters start showing up." And show up they did. By Friday afternoon, there were 3 news vans parked on the street. Neighbors were being interviewed. Someone had tracked down Brett and was trying to get him to talk on camera. Keanu's agent called him in a panic, asking if he needed crisis management support. "It's not a crisis," Keanu tried to explain. "I just let some kids use my pool." "I know," his agent said, "and that's beautiful, but it's also now national news. We should get ahead of this with a statement or something." Keanu refused. He didn't want to make a statement. He didn't want to do interviews. This wasn't about publicity or image management. It was about kids and community and doing something decent. Turning it into a media opportunity felt like it would ruin the whole point. But he couldn't stop other people from talking. Tommy's mother did an interview where she cried, talking about how much it meant to her son. Mrs. Patterson talked about how Brett's apology had been more meaningful than any punishment. Other parents shared their thoughts about how this had brought the whole neighborhood together. The video that had started it all was being analyzed and dissected. Body language experts weighed in on Keanu's genuine warmth. Psychologists discussed the value of restorative justice versus punitive approaches. Think pieces were written about celebrity privilege and community responsibility. Brett texted Keanu, "I'm so sorry. I think my friend's mom posted the video. I didn't know she was recording. Is this going to ruin everything?" Keanu called him instead of texting back. "Brett, this isn't your fault. And no, it's not going to ruin anything. The pool days continue as planned. Don't let the media circus change what we're doing here. But there are reporters everywhere. They keep asking me questions. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. This will blow over in a few days. The internet has a short attention span. Just keep being responsible with the pool schedule and treat this like the private arrangement it is." On Tuesday, the next scheduled pool day, there were photographers with long lenses trying to get shots from the street. Keanu came outside and politely but firmly asked them to leave, citing privacy concerns for the minors involved. Most did, though a few lingered at a distance. The kids showed up nervous, asking if they should skip the day because of all the attention. David was there, looking apologetic. "If this is too much," he said, "we understand. We can call the whole thing off." Keanu looked at the kids, at Brett taking responsibility, at Tommy who just wanted to swim, at all of them caught up in something that had spiraled beyond anyone's control. He thought about canceling, about going back to his quiet, private life. It would be easier, simpler. But then he thought about that woman who'd brought him cookies, crying because someone had shown her daughter that grace exists. He thought about Tommy's mother working 2 jobs and grateful that her son had this one thing. He thought about Brett learning what it means to own your mistakes and be given a second chance. "No," Keanu said firmly. "We're not canceling. This is your pool day and you're going to swim. The reporters will get bored eventually." Come on, they swam. The reporters did get bored, and slowly over the next week, the media attention faded just like Keanu had predicted. The story got replaced by other stories, other viral moments. The neighborhood went back to normal, or at least a new version of normal where Keanu was no longer the mysterious celebrity who kept to himself. The pool days continued. More kids asked to join, and Brett managed the waiting list with impressive organization. Parents started coordinating, trading supervision duties. What had started as a consequence of trespassing had become something that brought dozens of families together. And Keanu, who'd spent years protecting his privacy and keeping the world at arm's length, found himself actually enjoying being part of it all, not because of the viral fame or the headlines calling him a hero, but because on hot Tuesday and Thursday afternoons his empty pool was filled with laughter, and his quiet house felt a little less lonely. 3 months later, as summer turned toward fall and the Los Angeles heat finally started to break, Keanu found himself sitting by the pool on a Tuesday afternoon that had become routine. The scene was familiar now. David in a chair with his book, Brett coordinating who got to use the diving board next, kids laughing and splashing and just being kids. But something had shifted in a way that was hard to explain. The neighborhood was different. Where before people had mostly kept to themselves, now there were conversations happening across driveways. Parents who'd met through the pool schedule had formed friendships. There were barbecues and block parties being planned. The community had come alive in a way that had nothing to do with Keanu's celebrity, and everything to do with people actually knowing their neighbors. Brett had changed too, in ways that went beyond managing pool schedules. He'd become more confident, more responsible. He'd started a lawn mowing business over the summer, saving money for college. When asked about it, he credited the whole pool situation with teaching him about second chances and not wasting them. "You know what's weird?" Brett said to Keanu one afternoon. "I used to think being an adult meant having all the answers. But watching you handle this whole thing taught me that being an adult is more about how you deal with problems when they come up." Keanu appreciated that observation more than Brett probably knew. It reminded him that young people were always watching, always learning, always forming their understanding of the world based on what the adults around them did. Tommy's mother, whose name was Patricia, had become friends with several other parents from the pool group. They'd set up a carpool system for the kids, and Patricia's work schedule got a little easier when she didn't have to worry as much about Tommy being home alone during summer afternoons. One day she stopped by with a thank you card that had signatures from all the kids and parents. "This changed our summer," she told Keanu. "Not just the pool, but the whole community it created. Tommy's made friends with kids he never would have met otherwise. I've made friends. We all have. You gave us more than just a place to swim." Keanu deflected the praise like he always did, but her words stuck with him. He'd been so focused on his career, his privacy, his next project, that he'd forgotten what it meant to be part of something bigger than himself. The pool had reminded him. The viral moment had faded like all viral moments do, but it left unexpected ripples. Keanu's agent told him that his likability ratings, which were already high, had somehow reached new levels. Directors and producers specifically mentioned the pool story in meetings, saying it confirmed what they'd always believed about his character. But more interesting were the messages from regular people. His team forwarded him emails from parents around the world who'd been inspired to get to know their own neighbors better. From people who'd decided to share their own resources with their communities. From kids who'd written about learning from their mistakes after seeing how Brett had handled his one message particularly moved Keanu. It was from a teacher who'd used the whole story as a lesson in her high school class about restorative justice, community responsibility, and how we choose to treat people who make mistakes. She included essays from her students, and one line from a student's paper jumped out. Keanu Reeves could have chosen punishment, but he chose possibility instead. That phrase, "chose possibility instead," captured something Keanu had never quite put into words himself. He had chosen possibility, the possibility that these kids could learn and grow, the possibility that a mistake could become something meaningful, the possibility that sharing instead of hoarding might lead to something better than privacy. As September arrived and school started up again, the pool schedule naturally wound down. The weather was cooler, kids were busy with homework and after-school activities. On the last scheduled pool day of the season, Keanu organized a small party. Nothing fancy, just pizza and sodas, a chance to mark the end of summer properly. All the families came, not just the kids, but parents and siblings too. Keanu's backyard, which had been so empty for so long, was full of people and noise and life. David brought his grill and made burgers. Other parents brought side dishes and desserts. It turned into an impromptu neighborhood gathering that lasted until sunset. Brett found Keanu during a quiet moment and handed him a card. "I wrote this for my college application essay," he said. "My English teacher said I should show it to you first. You know, in case you didn't want me writing about you." Keanu took the card, which had the essay printed inside. He read it standing there while the party continued around him. Brett had written about the whole experience, the trespassing, the apologies, the lessons learned. But more than that, he'd written about how one person's choice to respond with understanding, instead of anger, had changed his entire perspective on how to move through the world. The essay ended with words that made Keanu pause. Keanu Reeves caught me trespassing and changed my life. Not with punishment, but with an example of how to be human. He showed me that having power doesn't mean using it to hurt people. It means having the choice to lift them up instead. I hope I can carry that lesson forward in everything I do. Keanu folded the card carefully and looked at Brett. This is really good. You should definitely use it. Are you sure? I don't want to seem like I'm using what happened for personal gain or whatever. Brett, you learned something meaningful and you're sharing that growth honestly. That's exactly what college essays are supposed to be about. I'm honored that you'd write this. They shook hands and Keanu watched Brett walk back to his friends, already planning their next hangout now that the pool season was ending. In just a few months, this kid had gone from someone making selfish choices to someone thinking about how his actions affected others. That was worth more than any movie Keanu had ever made. As the party wound down and families started heading home, Patricia came up to Keanu with Tommy. Her son was holding something behind his back, looking nervous but determined. Tommy wanted to give you something, Patricia said, gently pushing her son forward. Tommy brought out a drawing he'd made, a picture of the pool with stick figures swimming, bright sun overhead, everyone smiling. At the bottom, in careful child's handwriting, it said, "Thank you for the best summer ever." Keanu took the drawing, genuinely touched. "This is amazing, Tommy. Can I keep it?" Tommy nodded enthusiastically. "Mom said I should make you something since you let us use your pool and you didn't even have to. I'm going to hang this up in my house," Keanu promised, and he meant it. This drawing would mean more to him than any movie poster or award. After everyone left and the yard was cleaned up, Keanu sat alone by the pool as the sun set. The water was still, reflecting the orange and pink sky. It was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet than before. Not lonely, just peaceful. His phone buzzed with a text from David. "Thanks for everything this summer. You turned what could have been a disaster into something our kids will remember forever. Brett keeps saying he wants to be like you when he grows up." No pressure. Keanu smiled at that. The idea that he was someone worth emulating still felt strange, but maybe that was the point. Maybe being a good person wasn't about being perfect or having all the answers. Maybe it was just about choosing kindness when you had the option to choose otherwise. The viral attention had long since faded. The news sites had moved on to other stories. The reporters had found other subjects. But here in this neighborhood, something had changed permanently. Keanu was no longer the isolated celebrity in the big house. He was just a neighbor, someone who'd share a wave and a conversation, someone the local kids weren't afraid to ask for help. A few weeks later, Keanu was walking back from getting coffee when he saw a group of kids playing basketball in someone's driveway. They called out to him asking if he wanted to play. In the past, he would have politely declined and hurried home to his privacy. But he thought about what Patricia had said, about giving the community more than just a pool. So he played basketball with some neighborhood kids for half an hour, missing more shots than he made, laughing at himself and with them. Nobody took pictures. Nobody posted anything online. It was just a regular moment in a regular neighborhood, which somehow made it more special than any viral story. That night, Keanu got an email from his publicist. A major magazine wanted to do a cover story about him, focusing on the pool situation and his general approach to fame and kindness. They were offering significant money and promising editorial control. Keanu wrote back a polite decline. He didn't need another magazine profile. He didn't want to turn what had happened into more content for public consumption. The story didn't belong to him or to the media. It belonged to Brett and Tommy and all the other kids who'd learned something that summer. It belonged to the parents who'd become friends. It belonged to a neighborhood that had become a community. Besides, he'd learned something too. He'd learned that walls and gates and privacy, while sometimes necessary, could also be barriers to the very things that made life meaningful: connection, community, the simple joy of sharing what you have with people who need it. Winter came to Los Angeles, such as it was. The pool sat unused, covered for the season. But the friendships that had formed around it continued. The neighborhood stayed connected. And when spring arrived and the weather warmed up again, there were already texts in the group chat asking about when pool days might start again. Keanu said yes, of course. But this time he didn't plan to hide inside his house. He'd be out there with them, maybe grilling burgers with David, Maybe teaching the kids about the importance of sunscreen. Maybe just sitting and listening to their stories about school and friends and all the ordinary beautiful things that make up a life. The viral moment had passed, but its impact remained. Not because millions of people had clicked and shared and commented, but because in one small corner of Los Angeles, a group of kids had made a mistake. An adult had chosen understanding over anger, and everyone involved had decided that community mattered more than rules, that possibility mattered more than punishment, and that sometimes the best thing you can do with something you own is share it with people who need it. Years later, when people would ask Keanu about that summer, he'd struggle to explain why it meant so much to him. How do you tell someone that letting kids use your pool changed your understanding of what matters in life? How do you explain that what looked like generosity was actually you receiving far more than you gave? Eventually, he stopped trying to explain it. The people who got it would get it. The people who didn't would just see another feel-good celebrity story. And that was okay, because the real story wasn't about him anyway. It was about a community that came together around a shared resource. It was about kids learning from their mistakes. It was about parents supporting each other. It was about choosing connection in a world that often makes isolation feel easier. And it was about a pool that stopped being empty and started being exactly what a pool should be. Full of laughter, full of life, and full of the kind of memories that last long after the water has gone still.